In this video, we're going to be looking at the exchange rate and its impact on competitiveness. In order to examine this issue, let's look at an example. We want to know how the exchange rate influences the competitiveness of an economy producing cars. And let's say we're looking at the US versus Germany. Two cars, very similar. They may be different in terms of color or the places where the gadgets are, but essentially the two cars are equivalent in terms of value and what they do. One is made entirely in the US, let's assume, and the other one is made entirely in Germany. Here's the American car. And let's suppose the price tag is $20,000. The German car is produced in Germany, and let's say it's priced at 19,000 euros. Price of German goods are in euros because that's how they price them and how the cost is determined. The workers, suppliers, etc., all have to be paid in euros, so the price is in euro. Let's say there's exchange rate of 95 euros per dollar. So if you're looking at these two cars, try to figure out the answer to this question. Which one is a better deal in the United States? The US car, the German car, or the two deals are equivalent, given that the two cars are very similar? I guess you have the answer, but let's go over it. We need to figure out what the price of the German car is in the US. You take the German car price, 19,000 euros, and you divide it by 0.95 euros per dollar to get the dollar price of the German car. So the price of the German car in the US is $20,000, which is equivalent of the US car. Notice here that I'm not taking into account any transportation costs, etc. We're abstracting from all that to just make the point. What about the price of US car in Germany? Are the two cars equivalent of each other in Germany as well? That is an easy question, of course, because the same way that you've done the first question, this other question also can be answered by figuring out the euro value of a US car in Germany. So you multiply 0.95 euros per dollar by $20,000 and you get 19,000 euros. The two cars are again equivalent of each other. In order to see how the exchange rate influences competitiveness, let's look at the impact of depreciation of the dollar. We have the two cars, same cars with the same prices, and suddenly the dollar depreciates, becomes 0.9 euros per dollar. So now which one is better? The US car, the German car, or two are still equivalent? I think once you look at this for a moment, and given the analysis we discussed before, you immediately can tell what the answer is, right? So let's go over it. The German car in the US, you take the 19,000 euros, you divide it by 0.9, and you get $21,111. And the US car in Germany is going to be equivalent of 0.9 euros per dollar times $20,000, which is 18,000 euros. Now you can see that in the United States, the German car is much more expensive. So in the US, people will prefer the US car. And in Germany, also the US car is going to be cheaper and it's going to be a better deal. So the depreciation of the dollar makes the US product more competitive in the US, more competitive in Germany, and all over Europe, in fact. And in fact, relative to the products of Germany, US products become more competitive in the entire world. To see that, let's look at this question. This is a quick poll. I want you to think about this. People in Dubai buy equal numbers of American European cars. and suddenly the euro depreciates relative to the dollar, and we're looking at people in Dubai, for example, and we want to know whether they're going to be buying more European cars, more American cars, equal numbers, or maybe more American cars, maybe less, depending on how the Dubai dirham is exchanged for the euro and for the dollar. Think about this for a moment, and let me give you the answer. I hope you have chosen B. People will buy less American cars and more European cars in Dubai, because the same way that we did the calculation between the US and Germany, once the euro depreciates, the value of European cars in terms of the dollar goes down, and as a result, European cars become cheaper. That's true in the US, that's true in Europe, but that's also true in United Arab Emirates and anywhere else in the world. The exchange rate of the dirham relative to the dollar and the euro does not matter that much, because we're talking about buying two foreign cars. So people in Dubai have to turn their money into either dollars or euros. Once the money is turned into one of these two currencies, we've seen that in both cases, the European car is going to be cheaper relative to the American car because the euro has depreciated. So let me summarize this. When a currency like the dollar depreciates relative to other currencies, the US, in this case, in this example, US exports become more competitive, US products become more competitive, so exports rise, imports decline, and as a result, net exports rise, and vice versa. I must also say that the exchange rate may affect capital movements, how many bonds, European bonds or American bonds or other bonds people buy based on the changes in the exchange rate, but that effect is much more complicated than the effect on goods. So we're going to discuss this later in more detail. One other thing that I need to emphasize is the role of prices. In the examples I've given you before, the prices of goods produced in each country are given, and the only thing that changes is the exchange rate. But the prices cannot be always be taken as constant. They do change, and therefore we need to take this into account. The exchange rate quoted in the market that affects the trade is called nominal exchange rate, but that's only part of the story. We need to make sure that we look at the prices and adjust the exchange rate for prices to figure out competitiveness. If the American car, for example, in the example I had given you before, had become cheaper inside the country, then that would have affected competitiveness by itself. What matters for competitiveness is the price of the product of a country relative to the price of similar goods in other countries using the same currency. So if I want to compare competitiveness of American producers with German producers, what I need to do is to figure out what the price of American goods are in euros and then compare them with the euro price of German cars. Here's an equation that sort of specifies this relationship. Epsilon, which I have shown here on the left-hand side, is what we call the real exchange rate. So it's equal to the nominal exchange rate, the exchange rate quoted in the market, and we multiply it by the price level in the home country. For example, if the US is our home country, then E is the exchange rate of the euro versus the dollar times the price of whatever good or basket of goods that we're looking at in dollars. So multiplying E by P turns the price of the home goods into euros, makes them comparable with foreign prices. P star is the price level for foreign goods in foreign currency. So EP and P star are in the same units, foreign currency. The ratio shows the relative price of domestic or home goods versus foreign goods. This ratio is known as the real exchange rate. The real exchange rate, in effect, is the number of baskets of goods one can buy in foreign country with one basket of good in home country. Rather than thinking about one unit of domestic currency and how much foreign currency brings, here we're looking at a basket of domestic goods and figuring out how many foreign baskets of goods does it bring to us. This ratio, this number, is very important for competitiveness because once this number goes down, the country becomes more competitive in international markets. It also tells us that the producers in the country can produce goods more cheaply than their foreign competitors. For the consumers, of course, the domestic goods are also cheaper than foreign goods, so there's less demand for foreign goods in this case. The real exchange rate compares the purchasing power of a currency in home and foreign markets. But the purchasing power is measured here in terms of real goods and services. Let me give you a numerical example. Suppose this is the basket of goods we're looking at in Europe and United States. And we go shopping and we see that in the US, this basket costs $1,000. In Europe, it costs 12,000 euros. And let's say the exchange rate is 0.9 euros per dollar. In this case, if you put the numbers into that formula, the real exchange rate becomes 0.75. So this means that in Europe, the dollar buys 75% of what it can buy in the US. So it buys a lot more goods in the US, and therefore the US goods are more competitive. Similarly, if you look at euro, the euro buys a lot more goods in the US, and therefore there's going to be more demand for US products. Let me summarize what we've said about real exchange rate. A depreciation of the real exchange rate of, say, the dollar versus the euro makes US products more competitive in the US, in Europe, and in the whole world. If other things remain constant, then the US net exports should rise. And vice versa. If other things remain constant and the dollar appreciates, net exports of the US should go down.